Welcome to the Dylan Experience. Today is episode 63, and I've got a special guest for you. But before we get to that guest, make sure you like, subscribe, follow, do whatever you need to do to stay in touch with the podcast. Let's get into it. My next guest is a personal development expert, an advocate for hope and healing, a best-selling author, speaker, and host of Linda's Corner podcast. She's also the founder of Hope for Healing nonprofit charity. My guest today is Linda Bjork. Did I say that right, Linda Bjork?
Yes, you did. Thank you so much, Dylan.
I try to get that right. Linda, how are you today?
I am doing great. Thanks for asking.
I'm so glad you were able to come on my podcast because I was recently on your podcast. So it's a little bit of an exchange. And now I get to learn about you. So if you don't mind, tell me how you got into, building Linda's Corner podcast, how you got into building the charity, best-selling author. Tell me all this, tell me how you got to here.
Thank you so much, because you know that there is usually a story behind why we do what we do. And I had the opportunity to hear your story and I was touched by it. And I'm thankful for an opportunity to share mine.
Absolutely.
And as you hear my story, it doesn't sound as dramatic and there are no bad guys that I can blame, but there is a lot of pain and suffering and misunderstanding and just survival. And we do things when we're trying to survive that we unintentionally hurt someone else. So when I was 6 years old, and I am in a beautiful, wonderful family, but my mother experienced a trauma at that time. And it doesn't really matter what it was, because what really matters is what it meant to her personally. And to her, this trauma meant failure, rejection, betrayal, and just abandonment. And it sent her into absolute survival mode. And she emotionally shut down. And it affected all of our family. But in particular, there was something about me that triggered that trauma. And so she really especially avoided me. And so then my response and my understanding as a child, and I know that you understand this, and there's been a documentary called The Wisdom of Trauma with Dr. Gabor Mate, where he explains that when children experience trauma, they always blame themselves. So with my little 6-year-old brain trying to understand things as best as I possibly could, and seeing my mother shut down and shut me out, what I interpreted is two very important lessons. One is that there is something inherently wrong with me and that I am unlovable. That was the first very important lesson. And the second lesson is that my love and my efforts are not received, that what I have to offer is worthless. And so between those two things, I grew up feeling I am not important. I am not good enough. I am not valued. In fact, I'm invisible. And those are the stories that I told myself from age 6 clear on up until decades later, when I figured it out. Now, in my story, there's two parts, and that to me, I describe it as being broken and being crushed. And for me, those feelings of I'm not good enough, I don't matter, nothing that I do matters. No matter how hard I try, I will never be accepted. I will never be good enough. I will never be loved. And all of those things are going on, but you can keep those hidden pretty well. And you can continue to live your life. You can go to school, you can go to work, you can even get married, you can raise a family. You could do all sorts of things when you're feeling that way inside. And especially if you're good at hiding it. And I was. And then when I was an adult now, and I'm having my experience of having really, really hard things happen in my life that were to me failure, betrayal, grief, rejection, I fell apart. And I ended up sinking into a pit of despair. And it was so like I had fallen into a deep, dark hole. And it was so dark that no sunlight or happiness or hope could reach me, and a feeling of emptiness. And beyond emptiness, there was also a feeling of absolute, exquisite misery, where I longed daily to stop existing so that the pain would just stop. And I stayed in that place, and it wasn't constant. It kind of waved and ebbed and flowed. But there were many days where I was curled up on my couch, just sobbing, like, please let this stop. Please let it stop. And again, I've had a lot of practice masking, and I'm pretty darn good at it. And so even though I was absolutely miserable, most people had no idea. And so I kept it hidden pretty well from everybody except for my husband, who, I'm with him. We sleep in the same room, so he knew. But everyone else thought, things were fine. And then about 5 years in, my sister, who had no idea that there was anything going on in my world, she was at that time training to become a life coach. And she was planning this women's retreat, and she'd rented this condo in the mountains. And for 3 days and 3 nights, she was going to teach this group of women how to be happy and live fulfilled and all this awesome stuff. And she invited me to come. And I thought, no way, no way. First of all, I cannot handle being around strangers without a means of escape. It felt like my comfort zone had absolutely collapsed. And I did not feel safe, not anywhere and not with anyone. And I didn't think I could handle being around other people. And second of all, I was hopeless. I was stuck in my deep, dark pit. There were no windows. There were no doors. There was no escape. I thought, this is my lot in life forever. This is as good as it gets. And it was very, very hopeless. So she invited me. I thought, heck no. But the idea wouldn't leave my head. And so after a while, I finally contacted her and I said, I'm going to go. And so I gathered all of my courage together and I went. And I'm so glad that I did, because it is as if my sister lowered a ladder down into that deep, dark hole. And she showed me a way to climb out. And it was very much a ladder. It was not an elevator, not, you press a button and instantly you feel fantastic. It was hard, and it took time, and it took effort. And I have learned from my experiences that healing is not like a light switch where you just flip it on and instantly the darkness goes away. It is more like a sunrise, where the changes from moment to moment might be small and even imperceptible, but it does come. And because I have been in that place of darkness and I know how it feels, and to be able to recover and to re-experience joy in life and light and happiness, I want to offer a ladder to anyone who feels trapped in a dark place. And that is why I do what I do. That's why I've written my books. That's why I run my podcast. And that is why I started Hope for Healing, which offers free tools and resources to anyone who's willing to come and climb a ladder, because I don't want to leave anyone stuck in a dark hole.
I mean, there's so many relatable moments in stories like this. Obviously, my story, so much of it's relatable. I am quite curious, with what you do now, all of the emphasis that you do give people on helping them. What do you do now as this person that helps other people to make sure that you take care of yourself? What is your self-care? What does your self-love kind of look like now that because I think it's very easy to try to kind of transition into this healer, personality, but forget how to actually take care of you, where it's almost the trauma actually extends itself into, well, my only value is to give to other people. How do you approach that? And what have you found challenging in that?
I am so glad that you brought that up, Dylan, because I think you brought up several different points. One of them is that sometimes we get into the idea that our service is the only thing about us that matters.
Right.
And that is a trap that I have fallen into.
Mhm.
And I've learned something. A friend of mine said, there's difference between self-esteem and self-love. And her description of self-esteem is that I have talents and I have abilities. And self-love is I have value when I am doing nothing. And I think as we're working toward healing, that it is wonderful to gain self-esteem and to recognize that we have talents, we have values, we have something to contribute. But if we stop there, we're still in danger. We
Right.
need to work all the way to self-love, where we recognize that we have value even when we're not doing anything. And that matters. And I also love that you brought up the idea that once we heal from a trauma, once we are in this place of recovery and we're doing well, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden life is perfect and amazing and that other things don't happen.
Right.
In fact, I'd love to share with you what I do, but can I tell you a day that I had just a couple of months ago that
Absolutely.
I thought, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? So my husband is a pilot, excuse me, and we have this little two-person airplane that's a home built. And so we're out having a flight and the engine just this explosion and then smoke starts billowing out of the cowling and oil is oozing at my feet like blood. And the plane is shaking so hard that I thought it was literally just going to fall to pieces and we were going to be on the ground. And it was obvious that we weren't going to make it to a runway. And we needed to land here, now, where? And so we're scanning the ground, trying to find a place to land. And my husband saw a frontage road next to the freeway, and he said, there. And so we were able to land, fortunately, without incident. It didn't even damage the plane. We didn't damage people or property on the ground, but we're still just shaking. And a passerby picked him up so he could go get a truck and trailer so we could, clean up the mess we made here.
Right.
And I waited with the plane if anybody stopped by. Well, pretty soon I'm surrounded by 7 emergency vehicles who are all here to find out, what happened and whatever. And since I wasn't hurt, they didn't really have anything to do. So we're all just sitting around talking. And I'm trying to make light of things. Meanwhile, my heart is pounding. And I said, so is this the first time you've ever picked up a plane on this side of the road? And he said, no, but it is the first time that I found survivors. And I thought, oh, that did not help me calm down at all.
No.
So finally, my husband makes it back. We're able to take care of all the paperwork and all the problems and issues and whatever. Put the plane in the trailer, start going down the road. Well, we hadn't gone 10 minutes before there's this big explosion in the hood of the truck. And smoke is billowing and fluids are flying everywhere. And we're just like, really? So we pull off to the side of the freeway and cars are zooming past at 80 miles an hour. And my husband said, man, wouldn't it be ironic if we got hit by a car and killed just a couple minutes after surviving this airplane incident? And pop open the hood and we'd blown a hose from the radiator. So we made a makeshift clamp and we poured water bottles in and we thought, okay, we're just going to nurse this baby very carefully home. And slowly we finally made it home and pull into the driveway, just thinking, man, what a day. And open up the garage door and our car has a flat tire and it is like on the ground flat. And I looked at that and it's just like, really? And so from there, I thought, okay, you know what? We just need a break. We just need a break. This day is insane. Let's go for a bike ride. That's something that we love to do. And we have these recumbent bicycles. So we're taking this 10-mile bike ride to see if we can just kind of calm down and get back together. And my husband's bicycle starts making weird sounds and noises and things are catching. And it's like, really? So we pull off to the side of the trail and check and see what's going on. And some pieces had got caught in the chain. So we cleaned things up as best as we could and we kept riding and we got home and we took a look at our little canoe and we just said, this is the only vehicle we own that hasn't betrayed us today. we totally got to take it out and see if it'll sink. So we took out the canoe, we went for a ride, it didn't sink, and then we started putting the pieces together. So, you fix the bicycle, you take the car in and get the tire fixed, you fix the clamp on the thing, you work on getting a new engine for the plane, you just do all of the things. And we just laughed. We thought, man, this is a crappy day. But to be able to have a crappy day and be able to be okay about it means that you're in a good place of resilience, because crappy days happen. And so I love that you mentioned that what it is, it's daily working on ourselves. And so I have created, I do lots of different things, but I think in order for people to get started, it has to be small and simple. And so I've created an easy 5-minute morning routine. It has 4 parts. It's WW, music, movement, words, and water, something that anybody can do and you can fit in any schedule, even a super busy one. And I'll explain what it is and why it works. So the music is, you pick a song, something you love, something that makes you feel good, something that makes you want to sing, something that makes you want to dance. And then that is your timer. Most songs last between, 3.5, 4.5 minutes. During that song, then you're going to move your body, whether it's traditional kinds of exercises, sit-ups or push-ups or jumping jacks, or you can do shadow boxing, or you can do any kind of, yoga stretches or whatever interests you, or just dance, just move. And if you're not interested in moving your body, you're not feeling that today, you can even just move your mouth and you can just sing along to the song. But in some way, there's music and you're interacting with it. And then the words are, you grab a gratitude journal, write 5 things you're thankful for. And then water, or the last W is water. You drink a bottle of water. And so the reason why these things make a difference, and it's not just emotional, it is physical, it is chemical, is that music has the ability, more than any other thing that we can do, to affect the way that we feel. And if we're feeling bad, listening to music can help us to feel better. And research shows that even our brain waves tend to synchronize somewhat to the beat of the music. So if we're feeling frazzled, if we listen to calming music, it can literally help calm our brain waves down. Or if we're struggling with motivation, like, I don't want to get up, I don't want to get out of bed, I don't want to do anything, then listening to positive, upbeat music can literally help jumpstart our brain into action, which is amazing. And then if you add movement to that, oh my gosh, it does so many amazing things. It raises your energy levels. So if you're struggling with that motivation, I don't want to get up, I don't want to do anything, if you start moving, all of a sudden the energy comes and you're able to do what you need to do. It also helps to lower the levels of cortisol in our bodies. It relaxes our muscle tension. It increases the endorphins, those feel-good neurotransmitters in our brains. And then if we're not just moving, but if we choose instead to be singing, that has also been shown to do amazing things, similar in some ways to the exercise, in that it relaxes muscle tension. It reduces the levels of cortisol. It increases the levels of those feel-good transmitters. And, excuse me, also, they've done research on depression and anxiety and singing. They took a control group that was struggling with severe depression and anxiety. They said, okay, you guys just keep doing what you're doing. Don't change a thing. They took another group as a study group and they said, okay, all we want you to do is sing a song every day. That's it. Just add singing. 30 days later, came back to see how they were doing. The control group was exactly where they were before. But the study group that had added singing to their daily routine had significantly lower levels of depression and anxiety. And it was amazing because the only thing that they added was singing. And we don't know even all of the reasons why, but scientists have found that there's a tiny little organ in the inner ear called the sacculus. And when that is stimulated, it sends a little boost of pleasure to the brain. And that is stimulated when we sing. So that's actually one of the fastest ways that you can change the way that you feel. It adds that music and that you singing along, and it can change the way that you feel. So these are amazing things. So then if you get into the words and the gratitude journal, now you have gone through super hard things and I've gone through hard things. And sometimes if you hear someone say, well, write a gratitude journal, you think that's nice for little fluffy Pollyanna people who like to do that sort of things, but I'm dealing with real issues and real problems. So, don't give me these stupid I mean, it's almost offensive. But the cool thing is that the research shows that it actually makes a difference. They've done fMRI scans and found that it helps to stimulate the prefrontal cortex area of the brain where we have our conscious thought and decision making. It helps us to be able to act rather than just to react. It helps to improve our decision making. It also helps to improve the neuroplasticity of the brain, which is necessary for any kind of healing or growth. And it's necessary to be able to adapt to change and to be resilient. And so it does incredible things. And then they have done studies again on gratitude and depression and anxiety. Again, a study was done. They took a group of people struggling with severe depression, and they said, okay, we want you to write down 3 things every day that went well, 3 things you're grateful for. They came back and checked 15 days later. Didn't make any difference. They found that in 94% of participants, they had a noticeable improvement. They had gone from severe depression to either moderate or mild. It didn't solve all of their problems, but it helped put them in a place where they were better able to solve their own problems. And it happened fairly quickly. So you can imagine what would happen if you continued that sort of thing. And then the last thing is water. Water is one of the most overlooked things that we can do to help our physical, mental, and emotional health. Our brain is about 73% water, and research shows that if we're dehydrated as little as 1%, it begins to affect our mood and our brain functioning. And so if we just drink enough water, that's a simple thing we can do to help us feel better. So it's amazing. You can pack all of these tools, all of this effort, all of these benefits in 5 minutes by doing a simple thing that you can fit into any schedule, and it helps us to feel better. Now it's magic, but it's not magic if you do it once. It builds on itself. So
Right.
if you continue to do that sort of thing each day, and if you can do more, then by all means do more. But if you've only got 5 minutes, there is something you can do. And if we go from thinking, I probably should do something, into I am doing something, that's where the magic takes place.
Yeah. I think, to even go back a little bit further where you began, I think there's a lot of emphasis that you placed on perspective itself. And that's always something that I've been remarkably curious about, in terms of how people approach problems, right? The perspective in which they hold. You very much come at it from a perspective of, I have to be consistent. I have to approach this from a direction that I can actually do, and something that I not only will do today, but I will do in 3 weeks, in 3 months. And I think people that are trying to step into the healing journey are really, they struggle with that. I think that's one of the things that I try to approach is how are you looking at the problem itself, right? Are you looking at it as mental health? Or are you looking at it as mental illness, right? And I think there's a fairly significant difference between those two. Of, I have a mental illness, and that means I can't heal, right? It's
Mhm.
something that I will never get rid of. And I think that's not necessarily a fair statement, because science really hasn't done a good job at saying we can't heal just yet, right? Like, they've done a better job at saying we apparently can heal, and we didn't even know, than it's done of saying these things will never go away. Um, Whereas I look at mental health as being this systematic approach of looking at not just our emotional well-being, but actually looking at the connection between our emotional well-being, our physical well-being, our spiritual well-being. I can keep going on, right? There's so many different pieces of our body that are all we're interconnected. And so when we talk about like the mind versus the body, like, I don't like that, right? Like, it's mind and body, spirit, all of the things need to be approached. And I love how you also tie in these little intricate, uh, tiny little systems of adding dance, or music, or movement, water. Like, all of these little pieces are structurally hitting different systems, right? Approaching different systems and bringing them all together. And I think that's a I think that comes in some regard from perspective, having the ability to look at yourself as a whole and not as a piece, right? Not as an illness or a trauma or, a situation. You're able to look at yourself and say, I have to approach this from everything my body needs, not just the feeling that I have right now. You know what I mean?
That is so cool. What you're bringing up is amazing in that we used to think, and many people still do, that that the different pieces of us are kind of like a bento box where each thing is little separate, and the
Yeah.
physical health doesn't touch the emotional health, doesn't touch the spiritual health, doesn't touch the emotional health. They are all completely separate, and you don't let the things touch. And more we are realizing that's not the case at all. Everything affects everything. In fact, I recently spoke with a doctor who practiced for 40 years, and she said, at least 80% of the cases that we see that I treat, that I helped people with, it was either stress or trauma,
Yep.
things that were unaddressed. And yet most doctors don't actually recognize that. They treat the symptoms, but
Yep.
she had enough experience to be able to look back, and she didn't know it right away, to step back and say, wow, if we can get to the root of the problem, then a lot of other things just dissipate
Yeah.
because they're able to go away. And I also love that you brought up the idea that we are not a mental illness. We are not a problem, that things can heal. And that's one of the things you and I talked before about, the body keeps a score, Dr. Vanderkolk, and how the idea for a long time was, we don't know what's wrong with you. You're probably just crazy.
Yeah.
Into recognizing and being able to describe and say, oh, this is what's happening. And then as you progress even farther, it is, and there's something we can do about it. And we are fortunate to be able to be in this part of the story where people recognize that there is something we can do about it. So that makes all the difference. Because if we feel like there's nothing I can do about it, I'm stuck, then we stay stuck forever.
Yeah. I mean, I just finished Gabor Mate's When the Body Says No. And it's remarkably, it's just fascinating to listen to, what really I think has been historically understudied, right? This idea that stress is kind of the beginning of all disease, and how we approach that, how doctors approach that, because that book is very much written for doctors, not necessarily for lay people like, someone struggling through trauma or something like that. It's not necessarily written for that person. It's written for someone that has a medical background who's trying to help people, because the source of those problems are more than likely stress. Because it's really interesting. One of the chapters was talking about how cancer, the cancer nodules that most people go through with, in terms of like lung disease or breast cancer or things like that, they actually exist in all of us, which I found fascinating. But the only people that seem to actually create, the cancer forming, like the actual, cancer spreading nodules, are the ones who have gone through major stressors either before or during that, that time in their life. And I found that remarkably fascinating. And that book has so many situations very similar to that just reveals to us that we don't have a good idea of how to treat people right now. Like we struggle with really placing the foundation of where these diseases and these cancers and these problems really come from. And it's so important, I think, for people to advocate for themselves and to approach these problems and say, where have I come from? Because more than likely that has an impact on where I'm going. And I think
The truth.
it's such a powerful thing to be able to sit with yourself and say, wow, connecting the dots brings me to a point of, I never processed this, I never addressed this, and I never realized that my body can actually hold on to this stress in a specific place, and then that place is what has become my problem now. Like I don't think people really realize that, and that's obviously why you and me have work to do, right?
Absolutely. And you, again, you brought up so many wonderful things. I really appreciate when doctors like Dr. Gabor Mate and Dr. Vanderkolt, somebody who is respected in their field, is helping to be able to train the other doctors to be able to say there's more to it than we previously thought,
Right.
because we can only do what we've been trained to do. And so I really appreciate them opening people's eyes, at least those who are willing to have their eyes opened and realize there's more to it. And I'm also thinking about some of the incentives of, I mean, many people do what they do because they sincerely care, and
Yeah.
other people do what they do because they are expecting a financial reward. And so when we're looking at things that the answers are free or very inexpensive, that doesn't put a lot of incentive for someone who is trying to make money.
Hmm.
But it very much is incentive for people who are genuinely trying to heal and trying to share that. And so for those of us who have experienced these things and we recognize the pain, the suffering, the anguish, and what transformation is possible and available, you just want to shout it from the rooftops
Hmm.
and say, hey, guys, you don't need to stay stuck. Hey, guys. And the cool thing is, it's like we're walking along a path. You don't have to have all of the answers before we can say, hey, this way, come, follow this step.
Yep.
And then we can learn the next step together, which I think is really important, because as we're trying to help other people, if we think, oh gosh, I need to know every single answer before I am ready to help someone else on their journey, then it keeps us stuck.
Right. And that's just not the case, because you can just outright tell your story and that can help people. You
Isn't
know,
that magical?
it's
It
the
helps people know they're not alone.
yeah, it's community. It's very simple. You know, it's the ability to look at another person and be like, wow, I don't feel alone anymore, that now other people have gone through. And I think, movements, as controversial as they can be, things like Black Lives Matter and Me Too, without digging into the, whether it's corruption or not, but the idea of having that kind of community has solidified, I think, the support for certainly a lot of Black Americans to step forward and say, this is how I feel. And not only that, but like Me Too, right? Like the sexual assault and rape that has happened in America throughout history. People are stepping forward and offering up the stories of what they've been through. And I think that's a really powerful place to be for people that have historically not had a voice. And so why not use social media to actually give people a voice that have never had a voice? And that's certainly, in my opinion, only good, right? It's only good when you can give people that have never had a voice, because they'll use it in some regard to do better things, right? Will it be hard and harsh at times to see the truth I'm a white male, right? I'm not exactly the picture of ally for those communities, but it's going to be hard and it's going to be harsh for white males to approach that topic, but it's fundamentally necessary, even if it's hard, right? We still have to have hard conversations and work our way through them, because then we can start eliminating things like trauma and stress on a group of people that don't deserve it, don't need it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And isn't it wonderful to be able to create a sense of community? Because feeling like you belong and feeling like you are heard
Yeah.
are so important. They feed our souls. It
Mhm.
is what we need. But I would suggest that in addition to having that feeling of belonging and of being heard, that at that point we have some choices. And that is that we can choose to blame and to validate, I am who I am because of what happened to me. And I am going to defend my stuckness and my victimness. Or we can say, this is why I am what I am. This is why I feel what I feel. This is why I've done what I've done. And now I have a choice. And my choice is going to be to heal, to go back and to find that inner child who is hurting and who is suffering, and to just heal and embrace and to love that little child until the little child feels seen and heard and feels like he or she belongs. And then from there, everything else naturally seems to come into place. I've seen lots of different groups, therapy groups,
Mhm.
and sometimes they have a different purpose. For some, it is to, I want to be seen, I want to be heard, I want to be validated, which are all valid needs. But then from there, it goes to fueling anger, like adding fuel to a fire, where when I'm done and I finish this therapy group, I feel powerful in my anger, powerful in my blame. And it gives a temporary sense of relief, but it doesn't solve anything. It just leaves you aflame.
It almost creates new problems. Yeah.
Absolutely. Where there are other things where the purpose is, okay, let's put out those flames. Let's create a peaceful environment where we can grow something new and something beautiful.
Yeah. I think in many ways we're looking at the impact of culture on ourselves. I think how we approach trauma is very much um, how we approach things culturally, right? Like we deny, um, we look at and scoff at these things. We disagree, we deny. What does the media do, right? There's, this person's lying, or this person's a fraud, or these things we've approached them from the very same way. We've learned from the media of how to approach these things, and what we haven't learned from the media is empathy. And so it's not something that is easily taught. It's not something that's easily understood. I think social media is really the first place where I've seen it actively taught at scale, where, because I think this is absolutely necessary when we talk about trauma, and especially trauma within relationships. Because I think the people that, especially this podcast, right? This podcast is a great example. I've talked to so many people that, as they talk about their story and as they talk about their relationships, it's not about necessarily blaming, even though there's a little aspect to it. There's a piece to it because it's giving responsibility to that person, but it's also, it almost always comes out with this: I have empathy for what they went through. I understand that their history was jaded and broken and harmful to them, but they're also responsible for their own choices and their own paths. So there's this kind of natural dilemma that people have, and if they never see the empathetic side of how to approach someone and understand, you have deep insecurities and deep issues that you're not approaching, and so I can't be involved with that. There's also this, I think, more common way of, you're an asshole and you're worthless to me, and I just won't even engage with you, even if you change and you approach things differently. um and I think the healthier version is often the empathetic one, but that also looks at that person and says, you haven't changed, and I don't hate you, but I'm not willing to give you another chance because you haven't shown me what I think is necessary for us to have a relationship. I think media has played certainly a dramatically negative, has had a dramatically negative impact on how we approach conversations within relationships. Because when have we ever seen media that has been empathetic, right? Other than and I would say there's almost this um it's almost this, what is that, like the antichrist of empathy, right? Where they use empathy to support agendas, right?
Mm.
And that in itself can be remarkably dangerous, but it's It's something that we don't see a healthy version of empathy cast out to society of like, here's this wonderful tool to use. You know, I didn't even understand the definition of empathy until college. And I can guarantee if we had a conversation with, you know, college students, most of them wouldn't understand what it means. That's just a guess.
That's a little bit disturbing, isn't it?
I think so. I was never taught that. It wasn't even that I wasn't taught it. I had to learn it. I had to go find it myself. I was like, what does empathy means? Or what does empathy mean one day? Because I saw it in a book and I was like, huh, interesting. That sounds a lot like what I can do. I'm really good at that, you know? And it's fascinating to me that isn't something that's focused on. We focus on kindness and compassion, but kindness and compassion is a surface level thing for, you know, it's to me, it's manners, right? And manners was always a fake. There's fakeness behind manners, right?
Oh, interesting.
You know, like some people, well, I mean, how many times have you asked someone, how are you? And they say, I'm good, right? That's manners though, right? Like that's the appropriate answer in a social situation is to respond with something happy, right? Cheerful. But I guarantee you, most of the people you ask, how are you, are hiding behind this deep insecurity of, you know, I'm feeling fat today. I'm feeling sad today. I'm feeling angry today. I'm feeling overwhelmed today. But we don't have the conversations that are real and honest. So I think manners is and this is something I'm kind of developing on the go right now, but I think manners has a fakeness to it. And so we don't have an appropriate response to understand empathy. We don't know how to ask the question, how are you doing? Get the answer and say, but how are you really doing? How rare is that for someone to actually ask that?
I think that requires a level of connection and having a safe place. Because for many, many years where I kept absolutely silent because I didn't feel like that there was a safe place on the earth for me.
Right.
There was no one that I could talk to. There was no one who cared because, you know, remember, I'm unlovable. So, and my needs and my wants don't matter. So if you ask me, how are you doing? I know you don't actually care. And so from that, my response is going to be, I'm good. What I'm saying is, please leave me alone because I don't want to go there because it hurts. It hurts that you don't actually care. And so here, all you've said is a simple, how are you? And in my mind, I'm making up this whole story that probably, I mean, may or may not have anything to do with reality. So it is so helpful if we can find a safe place, even if it's just one person.
Right.
And I appreciate what you are doing through all of your efforts to create a safe place where people know, you know what, Dylan actually understands. He gets it and he does care. And what he's sharing because he understands. And that makes the world of difference because until we have a safe place, we're going to stay superficial because it's too scary.
It's certainly interesting that of how you kind of explained how are you, because what I was thinking when you were talking about that was some people go the exact opposite of I'm not going to tell you because I want to protect you from me.
Oh,
right? Because there's that differing of opinions where, you know, it's people pleasing behavior in a nutshell of like, why should I reveal to them how I'm feeling? It would just, you know, that's where I think that's where I kind of approach manners from is like manners is a protection against the person or for the person that asks the question, how are you? Right. Like, I'm going to be very kind to you, but don't, you know, also I need you to be kind to me and don't put anything on me that I can't handle. Right. And so like, there's an equal and opposite reaction of, I'm not going to tell you this, right? What I'm feeling. I'm not going to tell you my dad just died yesterday because it would be tragic for you to have to deal with that. Right. But the reality is like, it's a severe tragic event that I'm dealing with and I really need help, but I'm unwilling to actually approach the idea of helping myself, right? Because I don't want to hurt other people. I don't want to put, emotional burden on other people. And I think that's incredibly common in relationships there that are unequal, right? Where, we're trying to, certainly trauma, you talked about your own trauma and how like children take on blame for that trauma, even if it's completely illogical, right? Like you did it, I did it. And so when that happens, I think children can go one of two ways. They can go the way that you were talking about with how are you, where they protect themselves, or they go around and protect others from themselves. And that becomes almost even more dangerous for them because there's absolutely no appropriation of their own needs and resources for themselves. It's always for other people, and they can never then approach the problem. And then they question why do I feel so terrible all the time? And it's quite a simple answer if you look at the totality of the situation.
It's a simple answer when you get to the root, but
Yeah,
man, it takes some effort to get there. And
right.
isn't it fascinating that each of us can create our own stories about what someone else says and what that means? I talked with a marriage counselor and she said that she likes to, this can very much happen in relationships where someone will say something and it just triggers you and it makes you mad or hurts your feelings or something. And what she teaches is to say, what I make up about what you just said is, and then by saying that, it brings up a couple things. First, you're acknowledging, man, all these stories that I'm telling myself are actually stories I'm telling myself. And it also gives the other person a chance to say, oh, no, that's not what I meant at all. And so it helps to be able to facilitate better communications if we're able to recognize that when we have these feelings, if someone asks, how are you? And we feel like we have to hide everything, to recognize, I'm feeling weird because I'm hiding something. And then maybe maybe the person you're talking to right now isn't the safe place, but it is a good indicator that we need to talk to somebody that is a safe place. And one thing, if I don't have Dylan right next to me that I can tell my stories, is we can journal. And that way we can be our own safe place, or we can write things down, because sometimes we feel something and we're mad or we're upset. And you ask me why, and my answer is, I don't know. I'm just mad. And so taking a moment to write things down can be a way to figure out, oh, I am mad because I felt rejected when this happened, or I feel mad because, and we're able to get to those things. Because I think of when we stay on that superficial top level of I feel, and we don't get to the because, then we're not able to solve it.
Right. That's just, you're not processing, and I think it's quite helpful for you to have some ability to approach the why. Like, why is this happening? Why is this, and certainly you won't have all the answers of like, you won't have the science all the time, but to be able to dig into and connect to the feeling to the actual systematic response of your body, I think is a really good place for people to begin, to recognize like, this is what my body does when I'm triggered, like and not the emotional or political idea. I should say political idea of being triggered. I'm talking about the traumatic way of how the body is literally triggered into, approaching a physical stress response, or an immediate stress response. How the amygdala steps in front of the neocortex and says, hey, you're going to now feel this, right? You might freeze, you might, you might submit, you might intimidate, you might fight, right? All of these feelings, like understanding yourself and how you actually respond to things, how your body does, right? Because the you is really interesting, like, because there's almost separated yous. There's the you that has the neocortex control, where I can say, this is how I'm going to approach this problem with intelligence and logic, Whereas I think there's a more rational cause and effect kind of you, where your body takes over and says, hey, this person is threatening you. Maybe you should fight him, right? Or maybe you should run. Maybe you should act like you're going to fight them, but not fight them, right? Or maybe you should submit to them and just give up and cry, and maybe they'll leave you alone, right? There's multiple different responses, and all of those emotions, when conducted over a long period of time, I think is where mental illness really kind of solidifies itself, right? That's where you get things like dissociation and depersonalization, and having that ability to step in and look at your responses. How do I physically respond to this? And then start connecting, well, how was I always treated? You know, how did I approach conversations? How did I approach communication? I think that's one of the best ways to begin, because you actually start to connect the difference between how you react of logic and your rational kind of your automatic response of cause and effect. Of connecting those two, I think brings a profound wisdom to look at yourself and say, whoa, I actually understand that I can't really control this. And my goal isn't to control it, it's to regulate it. It's to say, I'm okay, come back into the logical control, and find my way to calm myself and bring myself into balance and peace again, and then approach the problem with logic.
I love that. And Dr. Vanderkolk kind of addresses that in The Body Keeps the Score, where he talks
Yep.
about the different methods of approaching, whether it's a top down
Right.
or a bottom up, where we can go from this angle and we can go from this angle. And isn't it wonderful that we have more than one approach, because we are unique, and something might speak to one person that doesn't really resonate with someone else. What resonates with them is a different approach. And isn't it wonderful that there's more than one right way to do things?
Absolutely.
And how marvelous to be able to recognize and become in tune with your body and say, oh, I just noticed that my heart started racing. I just noted that my hands got sweaty. I just noticed, and noticing these things, because it's amazing how many things we can go through. We don't
Right.
pay attention at all.
Nope,
That
not at all.
autonomic nervous system, it does it by itself.
Yep.
And we don't think about it.
Yeah, it's always interesting when people, when people come to me and have these conversations of the things that I can link back to, even just the physical symptoms, but also how they had conversations in their childhood and their teenage years, and how they've actually linked to now, and how they actually approach like the way they communicate. It's all interlinked, that your history is very, very, I think, rational. It leads itself, right? You don't just create these responses for no reason. And when you really pay attention, we're not that hard to figure out. We just have to be able to be honest with ourselves, because that's, I think, the hardest thing. Nobody wants to really be honest with themselves and say, wow, I'm the problem, right? Like I have to approach this and realize that the choices that I made back then were not good for me in the long run. And it kind of comes with where I think it's difficult is the shame, right? Is that, wow, I made this choice and it was really bad for me. But they don't realize that at that age, you couldn't make any other choice. It wasn't a choice. It was a lack of options. You didn't have any other option. And people like to shame themselves instantly, right? Because that's also its own habit of sorts. And that's where I think the challenge really lies, is how do you approach shame, and whether that's a conversation with yourself or a conversation with someone else, how you approach shame is how you, I think, learn.
And that's very interesting, that the concept of shame. And I know Brene Brown, she describes shame versus guilt.
Yeah.
That guilt is, I did something wrong or I did something bad. And shame is, I am. It is identifying with that
Right.
badness, that not enoughness, that fill in the blank. And so I think that goes back into, who am I and how did I get here?
Right.
And working our way back to figuring out why is this defining me rather than something that I did or something that I experienced. And I think that's very important to be able to recognize that, it's a combination of compassion and accountability and becoming self-aware. And I think as we're frustrated, I know for me, when my sister was talking about, and when we get down to it, the real problem is you. It hurt. In fact, I was so angry. It's like, what do you mean? It is so much more comfortable to be miserable in my victim mentality where, I have no choice.
Right.
Everything just happens to me, than to accept accountability of, I made this choice. I made this conclusion. I made this connection. And it doesn't mean that I was bad. It means that, that was the best solution, the best answer I could come up with at the time. So to say, okay, when I was 6, I made these decisions. I made these conclusions. I have to own it. That isn't the way the whole world is. That was
Right.
my interpretation of the world. But then I can be compassionate with myself and say, I was just a kid. That's the best I could come up with.
Right.
And then to recognize, like when Dr. Gabor Amate says things like, and everyone else makes those same decisions, it's, oh, okay. I'm normal. I'm normal too. I did the best I could.
I think we're entering into an age of accountability where not only do you see on social media and media itself where people are actually getting in trouble for the bad things that they do, but I think people in general are finding a period in human history where they actually are allowed to take accountability of themselves and say, hey, you know, this is what trauma did, right? Because we actually, I think, understand the physical and the body, the emotional kind of reality of what the body does and how our mind kind of implements these choices for us at a young age. And so we get this opportunity to look at ourselves not as victims, but as I am actively engaging in the choices that determine my future. And I don't think we've ever really had that opportunity before, right? Like it's been different, right? It was motivational speaking before it was professional speaking, right? It was, you know, how do I motivate myself to do this? Well, now it's how do I heal, right? I think there's less emphasis on this kind of supernatural motivation and more emphasis on how do I take accountability for myself and move forward, along with this massive and overwhelming kind of uh, picture in culture where we actually look at people that are making big mistakes and saying, how are you being held accountable for your actions? And it's quite simple. It's quite easy to see. And I think right now, I think the 2020s is going to be remembered for that accountability, right? Of how are you taking accountability for yourself? And are you actually a good human or are you just faking it? Right.
Wow, a good human or faking it. These are our options. Crazy. I think that this idea is very empowering because it means that we are in control of
Yeah.
ourselves. We have a voice in our direction. We have a voice in our success or our failure. But it is a transition to get to that place of accepting the
Yeah.
accountability and the power that goes with it. I mean, like, Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. I think I said that wrong. But the
No,
idea
that's right.
is that we have that, and we need to wake up to the fact that we have it and we can do something about it. And that is terrifying and enlightening, freeing. And if we can get past the terror and get through that learning curve of this is okay, into it feels like freedom. It
Yeah.
feels like joy. It feels like peace. And I think that those are a beautiful direction to take. But it does
Absolutely.
take through getting something scary in order to get to that good place.
Yeah. And you might have to be wrong.
Oh,
Right.
I'm wrong a lot.
Yeah. I think the hard part is you might have to actually look at yourself and say, I was wrong.
That is very hard if we define ourselves by that. If we say, I am wrong, therefore I am bad, instead of just saying, again, like the shame guilt thing, say, I am wrong. That means I can change it and do it right.
Right.
Rather than, no, I'm stuck in wrong. I am defined by wrong. I must never be wrong. If I am ever wrong, I am a total and complete failure. This
Absolutely.
black and white perfectionism of I must be perfect or I am a failure does not benefit us.
Not at all. Well, I mean, I shouldn't say that. I think it can benefit you, but not in the way you think it does, right? Like it benefits your, I mean, you overwork yourself, you do more than you have to, right? Like you maintain things that are not as important as yourself, right? And so there's people that have that perfectionism that go very far, but ultimately those are the people that probably die of an autoimmune disorder that takes them far too early,
Right.
as the book When the Body Says No kind of describes. And so there is benefit, but it's not worth it in many cases, and quite harmful, because eventually your body is going to say, no, you're not
Right.
doing this anymore.
And there's a distinction. Some people pride themselves in saying, oh, I want to do a good job because I'm a perfectionist. Like this is a badge of honor. And I like to separate, because we can use the same words to mean very different things, that striving for excellence, like an Olympic athlete who wants to push themselves and drive and do an excellent job, is different than saying, I am perfect or I am a failure. To
Right.
me, when I use the word perfectionism, I'm talking about that duality. I am perfect or I am a failure, because that is impossible to maintain. Whereas striving for excellence, I think that's a great idea.
I strive to follow my values, whether that's excellent or not. I don't give a shit. Right. Like I just look at myself and I say, like for me, I have a few my main values are empathy, integrity, and learning. Like I try and follow those as religiously as I can, because in many ways they are always adapting, right? Like my empathy informs my ability to learn, because I have to learn from people, right? People teach me what's the right way to treat you, right? And so, Linda, if you're looking at me and you're like, this guy's crazy, right? That informs me of maybe I need to change my mind, or maybe I need to change my thoughts, or maybe I need to ask you, Linda, do you think I'm crazy, right? And is this idea crazy? And you might tell me yes or no. And so empathy informs me that I need to learn. And then integrity is informed by my learning, and learning is what is the right and wrong way to kind of approach this situation, because in many ways there's always a right and wrong way to approach a situation. And so I try to learn what is my version of right and wrong, and how do I define it. And that never stays completely solid. I think it's almost, I feel like it's like peanut butter, right? It can be solid one day and then it can be very malleable the next, where, okay, something just happened that has informed me that this is entirely wrong, right? And now I have to change this and make it, I have to restructure this into something that I now can see I was wrong in the past, and I can be better. And then you follow on with things like respect and accountability and compassion, love, all of these values that I hold true. I've defined them, right? I know exactly what they mean to me. And not only that, but I know how to operate with them, right? I know what is too much empathy, and I know what is too little empathy. I know it's too much love and what is too little love, because that is informed by my integrity, what is right and wrong. Because once I pass over that threshold of giving too much empathy, my body very much informs me that you have made a mistake, Dylan. You've given too much of yourself. You've overextended. And so certainly that's excellent for some people, but it's really bad for me. And so, I stop kind of looking at it from a perspective of, is it good? Is it bad? Is it excellent? Is it wonderful? Is it perfect? Is it a bad thing? And I very much look at how I approach life from a value oriented perspective, where I say, what is this conglomeration of all of these values, and how do I approach this situation? Because I think it is, once I've defined those things, it's given me an opportunity to say, to make decisions that are remarkably easy for me, right? Of, can I fit this meeting in? No. Like, I'd love to, I really would, but I'm exhausted and I can't do it. Right. I can't force myself to do more than I can. Right. And so I approach it from more my values than I do from this overarching societal or cultural or parental kind of guideline of, this is what you're supposed to do. And I approach it from, what can I do? If that makes sense.
I love that. What a beautiful demonstration of self-awareness. And you have put in the work to become self-aware of what matters to you. And that when you are working within what is right for me, what is
Right.
wrong for me, and then paying attention to, oh, my body just said, I've crossed a line. I need to take a step back. And then I loved that you mentioned how decisions are easier. That once you've put in that work, you have that groundwork laid, you know who you are, you know what matters to you, decisions are easier. And also you're stronger and you are less influenced by the influences of other people's opinions, or maybe a political sway or whatever, because you know who you are. Isn't that wonderful? Well done.
I love it. It feels great. Right. It's hard, it's not an easy thing to build. And that's something that, I've, now is kind of that time where I'm looking at that and thinking, how did I build it? Right. So I can, hand that off to other people. But it's still it's a remarkably difficult thing to build, because the difficulties up front, right? Most people will live their lives, I think, in the opposite fashion of, they'll try to make really hard decisions all of their life and never really know if it's right or wrong. Where I kind of have taken that idea of, I've learned from everybody else and my own experiences what I think is right and wrong. Obviously, according, we can look at laws and stuff and implement that idea, and realize, this is what I think is right and wrong. And then I make easy decisions for the rest of my life until, obviously there's hard decisions in there, but I make much easier decisions because of the fact that I've put all the work in up front to realize, this is how I would approach this situation. And certainly I don't, what's interesting is I've found myself overthinking for 19 years of my life after my dad died. And now I only overthink when I really want to, which is interesting to me, is that I have the ability to stop, right, when I want to. As I can take my mental energy and I can say, is this even worth it? And I can say no. And then it just all of a sudden stops. Like, okay, let's not waste our time. In 19, for 19 years, that was not a possibility. That was not even an option. The only way I could get my mind off of anything was to do something else. Right. And so I would go to the range and I would shoot, I'd shoot long range. And that was the thing that took me away from the overthinking. But now I almost don't feel like I need hobbies all that often. Right. When I do get stressed, I recognize myself starting to do things, but then because I recognize it, because I have that self-awareness, I can take a step back and say, hold on a second. What is the real problem? Where are we, how are we going to approach this from a perspective that you're not just going to distract yourself from the problem, right? And so I approach those hard conversations with myself and I make hard decisions, right? Where 15 years ago, I would have just kept going, right? And that's never good for you, right?
Exactly. And what a marvelous example you are of showing what the goal is. I think as we're talking about doing hard things, it's scary to do something hard. And if we don't have an end goal, a purpose, some kind of prize at the end of this journey that is worth it, then why am I going to put in the effort?
Yeah.
But if you can say, okay, now I feel empowered. Now I feel at peace. Now I feel in control. Now I feel free. And then you realize, ooh, these are things that I want. These are things that are worth it. When I feel like I'm good enough, when I feel like I can be loved, when I feel no guilt, just being, and to be able to be quiet with yourself, and it's a good thing and not a terrifying thing. When whatever it is that we're searching for, that we desire, when we realize we can have that. And then it's, this is going to be hard, but it's worth it. Then I might take those steps and go through those hard things to be able to get there. So thank you for reminding people that it's worth it.
Absolutely. Well, Linda, let's talk a little bit about some of the stuff we haven't talked about yet, because otherwise we're going to keep having conversations like this, which are incredibly interesting, but don't talk about as much about what you're doing. Can you tell me, tell me about your book, tell me about your charity, tell me about your podcast, tell my audience a little bit more about the things that you do, and feel free to share whatever it is you want to share about them.
Oh, thank you. So I am an author and I have several books. One of them is called Crushed, A Journey Through Depression, and that chronicles my story of going through the things that I did and of that healing journey. And it is a beautiful opportunity for people to experience that empathy. I've had lots of readers who've said, wow, I can't believe you said that. You didn't censor stuff out. It was so raw. But it felt like you were in my head. It felt like it was my story I was reading. And it's very interesting because even though our experiences are different, the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions are actually very similar and relatable. So that is an opportunity to kind of, again, realize that, I'm not alone and that there is hope for healing. And another book is called You Got This, An Action Plan to Calm Fear, Anxiety, Worry, and Stress. And we're just, getting out of COVID and getting things back together. And a lot of people are stuck in feelings of fear. And I want to be able to help empower people. This is some things that you can do to be able to get out of that place of fear into a place of feeling peace, which is so, so important. And my nonprofit is called Hope for Healing. And we have lots and lots of free resources to help people to be happier and to be able to increase feelings of confidence and self-esteem and to be able to manage stress and to be able to improve relationships and to be able to calm feelings of depression and anxiety. It is so wonderful when we realize that there's something we can do about it and that we have more power than we might have realized that we did. In fact, I just talked to a doctor, again, studied for 40 years. She said, you have a lot more power over your health and well-being than your doctor does. And that was very reassuring to have that second witness. And then my podcast is called Linda's Corner, and I get to talk to awesome people from around the world and just things to help us be better, to be a little bit stronger and a little bit better and have a little bit more hope. So we cover lots of different topics and it is wonderful. And I love what I do. And I just love who I meet. And so I'm so grateful to have the chance to meet you. And if people want to find me, I am at hopeforhealingfoundation.org. And you can find my podcast at Linda's Corner Podcast or any place you listen to podcasts, Apple, Google, Spotify.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but I know like why I've continued the podcast as I have has very much been like for selfish reasons, right? Like these are conversations that are like, learning is one of my values. Like I learned so much from people, and I have such interesting conversations that it's been For me, I've historically been a very introverted person that I don't really want to have conversations, but this has actually been really enlightening. It's been energetic. It's been something that I've really enjoyed from the get go. And so, like, my podcast is as much as I do it for other people, it's so selfish because I love having these conversations every single time. I feel like I've learned something new, and I have an overwhelmingly positive experience. I have yet to have this is what, 63 podcasts now, that I've yet to have a bad experience with anybody. And I just love it. And not everything that I do is easy and fun, but this has been just always a great time. And I don't know how you feel about your podcast, but that's how I approach it. And I imagine that you're probably pretty similar with Linda's Corner.
Isn't it wonderful that we can have a win-win type of situation?
Yeah.
When we're doing something good, something that helps and lifts and empowers other people, and it's not a drain on us,
Yeah.
it is a joy.
Right.
And I think when we have that joy, that personal joy, and it is authentic, I think people can hear it. I think they can feel it. I
Yeah.
think they can really see, you know what? They mean it.
Yeah.
They mean it. And maybe they have something that can help me too. And that's what it's all about.
Yeah. This has been great, Linda. It's been, it was a joy to be on your podcast. I'm glad you came on mine. Just fantastic conversation. But before we end this, I've got to ask you the question that I ask everybody else. If there was one message that you could leave the world, Linda, what would it be?
My message is the message that I needed to hear when I was a little girl. And that is that you are worthy and deserving of being loved and valued and appreciated. I also want people to know that they're not alone and that there is hope for healing.
Perfect. Well, Linda, thank you for joining me. It was again a pleasure. And we'll make sure that all of the links that get to you are provided in the show notes below. If you're out there listening to this still or watching this, thank you for joining us on the Dylan Experience, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks, Dylan.
And that's it.